G'day, U-Mob. How's it going? Welcome to this episode of the Goss. I'm your host, Pete, and this is the Aussie English podcast, the number one place for anyone and everyone wanting to learn Australian English, history, news, current affairs, all that sort of stuff. So today is a Goss episode where I sit down with my old man, my father, Ian Smissen, and we have a bit of a yarn, a bit of a chinwag about the week's news. Except in this episode, I thought it would be a good excuse for us to talk a little bit about my new hobby, whisky. So we talk about booze, grog, the piss. These are slang terms and other words for alcohol, alcoholic beverages. We talk about rum, whiskey, vodka, beer, and the different ways in which they are produced and, what we like, what we think of them. Anyway, I thought it would be a good chat for you guys who are interested in alcohol. And without any further ado, smack the bird. Hopefully he's not too drunk, although it's a kookaburra, you never know. Let's get into it. All right, Dad, welcome back to the Goss.
Hey, Pete. It's good to be here. Hey, everyone. It's been a while, 3 or 4 weeks.
Give us a cheers. We opened these beforehand.
We did, yeah. Local beer, Blackman's.
Blackman's.
So I'm going to have to do this left-handed. I don't know where the brewery is, but they sell them out of Ocean Grove. So.
They definitely do. What does it say here? Yeah, Torquay, Australia. So there you go. Anyone interested, have a look.
It's going to be a mess.
No, it's good. As I'm on the keto diet, it is few and far between.
Once a week, if you're lucky.
And you've seen that I've been getting into the whiskies.
Yeah, well, they're okay. They're neutral.
Do you think that's taken me too long to get into those? Do you think that's...
Well, I would say so, but, these things are always a personal taste. There's you should, and we've had this discussion a lot throughout your life and my life of having grown up with various people in my life starting most sentences with "you should."
This is Dad's trigger sentence.
It is.
Trigger phrase.
It's the one where somebody says "you should" to me, and my eyes just sort of glow. The red mask comes over, and I just stop listening.
But yeah, it is interesting getting into the world of whiskey because I feel like I was blind and now I can see. In terms of it's one of those things where
that's an interesting crossover euphemism.
Yeah. Well, previously I just. I don't know what...
This is good.
I had whiskey in the past. I tried it, but I'd never got hooked on it. Never really understood it. I remember my first experience of trying whiskey was, at least as far as I can remember, straight whiskey was going to, I think, James's 21st or something, and just grabbed some Johnny Walker's Black, thinking, oh, it's expensive, at least relatively, and it's better than the red, so it's going to be good. But then I remember opening it and just being like, this is rat's piss. I need to mix this with Coke. But I think looking back, it's funny because I don't think I really appreciated what I was drinking and what I should be looking for.
And the way you drink it too, that whiskey is not a shot alcohol to drink.
Get some drinks in.
It's not a just throw it down because it's mostly fairly heavily alcoholic, so it burns on the way down. But that's part of the attraction to it if you sip it and drink it slowly. And if you just throw it back, you miss the subtlety of the flavours in it, and all you get is this sensation. So it's not like tequila, which has got a strong flavour, but it doesn't have a lot of variation in it, and that's what typically people are drinking with shots, or vodka, which has very little flavour. So
yeah, I know. Well, it is interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit about, for obviously all of the people who are interested in alcohol and the different kinds of liquors that you can buy, what are the basic liquors that you're going to encounter when you go into a liquor store, into the bottle-o?
The bottle-o, yes, the bottle shop.
How do they differ from one another in terms of how they're made and taste and everything like that?
This is with the usual disclaimer that I'm not an expert, so anything I say will either be made up or... fabricated. No, it won't be fabricated. It'll be my experience rather than my intimate knowledge of the details of it. But look, if you're talking about distilled liquor, then it's distilled alcohol, which is simply taking some form of plant material that will ferment and produce alcohol.
And do you want to talk about quickly what the fermentation, why is that an important step when it comes to making alcohol?
Well, fermentation is the actual process of breaking down the carbohydrates in the plant material and turning it into alcohol. Yeah. It's just a metabolic pathway
It's a waste product. Alcohol is actually the waste product of the yeast.
Yeah, exactly.
Breaking down whatever plant material.
Yeah,
that you put
or
in
it's
there.
a step in a series, and a typical fermentation process doesn't take that breakdown any further, because you can break alcohol molecules down, but we don't want to. The whole point of them is creating ethanol. And that's the point, is that alcohol is a generic organic chemistry term for a series of organic compounds, all with the OH ending on them.
Yeah, oxygen, hydrogen.
Yeah, and it's got the hydroxy group attached to the end of a chain, typically a chain of carbon and hydrogen atoms. And it's the ethanol that we're actually trying to produce.
Yeah.
Methanol is toxic, and some of the others are far less drinkable as well. They're toxic as well, although we have different uses for those in industrial chemistry as disinfectants and those sort of things. But so it's ethanol that we're trying to produce, and fortunately that's the major product of breaking down sugars in plant material. So that's that first step in the process, is to get that fermentation going, produce the alcohol, but then to distill it, which is to purify it, to get rid of most of the water and most of the other products that are there. And you can use almost anything. People have used that potato peel to make alcohol. But the typical ones are malted barley. Malt is that compound that gets produced as the barley seed germinates.
So what happens there is you end up with a grain that is barley, and you add water to it in order to get it to grow, to germinate. And as a result of germination, the proteins and the other chemicals within the seed change as the plant starts to grow. And I guess with something like whiskey, you can have a malted whiskey, and you've cut the process of malting, right, of germination with the smoking that happens to the grain. But the crazy thing is, right, this is always what confused me. It seems like vodka and gin tend to be effectively the same thing, really, except that gin is flavoured, right?
Yeah,
vodka is good if you can't taste anything, but it's effectively ethanol and water.
Yeah, basically. Now, the vodka aficionados will be rolling their eyes back in their head and going, you Philistines don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And they'd be absolutely accurate with my understanding of vodkas. But typically vodka has very little other compounds in it other than alcohol.
That was always my definition, though, of a good vodka. It was one that went down easy and didn't burn. Yeah. Right? And it was usually Grey Goose.
Yes.
Was one of my favourites.
Whereas gin is a secondary distillation. So they are actually gin producers are not producing the alcohol themselves typically from a normal distillation process. They'll buy a huge vat of alcohol.
Distill it.
And then they will add their various, what they call botanicals, so the various flowers, seeds, leaf components to it to add the particular flavours. And every gin distillery, every gin manufacturer has their own secret recipes for which botanicals they'll add and in which proportions and so on. Some of them will tell you what they add, but they won't tell you how much of each. But
they don't want you taking the recipe.
No, but it's also an advertising campaign, and particularly with some of the Australian gins now where they're trying to use Australian native plants. And so,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Like wattles and ironbark and tea tree?
No, a little bit.
We were talking about this the other day. That's toxic.
Flavour as well as literally. But things like, I know Russ up at the Whiskery, where you guys got married.
This is a local
distillery
bar and distillery and gin bar.
He's making whiskey, but the challenge with whiskey is that, and we're sidetracking a little bit here, that whiskey is that primary distillation. You produce the alcohol and then you put it in barrels, and they're secondary barrels. They're not just straight wooden barrels. They're typically barrels that have either had sherry or often another form of whiskey.
But back to gin quickly.
And then they go back to gin, because gin you can produce instantly. So whiskey will take a minimum of 8 to 10 years typically sitting in a barrel in order to give it the flavour they want. So if you're going to build a distillery and you're going to make whiskey, then you're effectively twiddling your thumbs for 8 to 10 years before you get something. Yeah. And so a lot of whiskey distilleries produce gin, because you can produce gin in a matter of hours, because you're taking the alcohol, you're mixing in your various botanicals, you are then boiling that up again and distilling it again so that those botanicals get dissolved properly infused into the product, and then you effectively just bottle it and sell it.
Yeah. And there's one one mandatory flavour that has to go in there, right?
There is
one floral.
There is
addition.
There is juniper berries.
Yeah, which are really hard to get in Australia. Apparently.
You can't grow them in Australia.
So they're the Mediterranean, from the Mediterranean.
Yeah. They're a sort of warm Mediterranean. I think we probably could grow them, but nobody ever has. And certainly not in the quantities that are required. So they typically imported into Australia. And that's one of the challenges of small gin distilleries in Australia. If they're not producing, because you've got to buy this stuff by the ton, because it comes in a ship,
or it just costs way too much.
Yeah, and so you're not going to go, can I buy 10 kilos and import it?
Yeah.
So there's people who are buying tons of it, but even if you wanted to buy a ton, it's still very expensive. So a lot of those small gin distilleries go in as a collaborative and purchase a bulk lot and then break it up. That's what gin is, and then a whole bunch of other things. So I was just going to say that Russ at the whiskery, his latest gin that he'd made has Australian saltbush.
Yeah,
one of the elements in it, and it adds this. It's a subtly salty flavour, but it also has this really distinctive. If you go down and find saltbush anywhere, and there's lots of species of saltbush, and I don't know which particular one he's using. It's probably a local one around here, but
that's pretty cool.
You can actually just go and pick the leaves off and rub them and then smell them, and they have these sort of really interesting smells, and it's edible as well, so you can actually eat it. And I don't know whether he's using the leaves, the berries, a combination or whatever, and he probably won't tell us, and rightly so. It's a proprietary trade secret. But so I actually quite like gins as well, but whiskies are the ones that, because of the way you have to then, you put the distilled alcohol into a barrel, and it will depend on what that barrel has had in it beforehand and how long you leave it there as to what sort of flavours it's going to infuse into the whiskey itself.
So that's where it branches out into way more complexity, it appears, to the novice who's just gotten into it.
Whiskey is not
myself
whiskey.
than vodka or rum. Rum may be getting a little closer to whiskey in terms of how it can be.
Typically rum is manipulated by adding things, rather than leaving it in a barrel for a decade and infusing stuff out of the wood. Or whatever was in the wood previously.
It just seemed like such a really cool thing once you get into it and you realise, holy crap, there are thousands of whiskey distilleries across the world and thousands of different types of whiskey that come out of these different distilleries. They can use all kinds of barrels that have had wine in them or sherry in them or bourbon in them in order to then infuse these flavours into the whiskey distillate, and then they can wait longer and longer periods of time to get more of that flavour to come out into the actual alcohol inside the barrel. So it does seem like it's such an art, and it takes a long time. There's no fast tracking of it.
The science will tell you how to get something out of the end of it, and the art is what you'll get out the end. It's an interesting combination.
But how did you get sucked into it before we move on topics?
Look, my father used to drink whiskey, and he died when I was in my mid-20s, so I really wasn't a whiskey. I couldn't afford to be a whiskey drinker, other than every now and then at the pub, instead of drinking beer, you'd have a whiskey and Coke or something, and that was always Johnny Walker, because that was the bulk the whiskies that pubs would buy. So I never really got into drinking straight whiskies until my father just sort of said, well, why don't you try this? And I went,
at the age of 10.
At the age of 10, no, I was in, I suppose, early 20s. And I went, oh, yeah, that's all right. And I wasn't offended by it, but I wasn't going to pay money for it. And I think that's the thing, is that whiskey snobs will always tell you that if you pay the money for a better whiskey, depending on what you like, because there are some that are very strong in their flavours, and highly alcoholic, so that they have that burning sensation as well when they go down your throat.
Well, and just to quickly pause you there, is that part of the reason that you gravitate towards the ones that you really like, which are the really smoky, peaty, very strong burn your throat out sort of types? Yeah. Was it that you got on the train and it was a really rapid, like, give me the most extreme version, or was it a very slow process?
Look, it was. I don't think it was really even. The train metaphor is probably implying that it was continuous.
Yeah.
It was sort of, I'll try that, and went, oh, yeah, and then I'll try something. Well, what's the strongest one you've got? And go, ooh, I quite like that.
Yeah.
And I quite like some of the mild ones as well. So then it's a matter of fitting it in between. But it's a sort of multi-dimensional matrix in terms of flavours. It's not just a straight, strong and weak.
And you can't just get everything that you might like out of a single whiskey, I take it. Like if you have peat and smoke, these are these sort of really overpowering flavours that you can't necessarily have these delicate undertones and still pull them out easily when you're tasting
sort of sweeter, florally things, and people talk about caramel and vanilla and those sort of flavours in them. And obviously they're not adding caramel and vanilla. It's just whatever the compound is. It's in those things is triggering the same part of the brain and going, oh, I like that.
It's definitely opened my mind up to the fact that taste can be used differently. So I think, when I drink whiskey, it's not the same kind of enjoyment that I get out of taste as when I eat a Mars bar. You know what I mean? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Where the interesting part of whiskey, it seems, is experiencing the little roller coaster of flavors that you get and the experiences that you get, the peppery, the burn, or the smoke, the peat, the caramels, and they come at different times. They arrive at different parts of your mouth.
It's not just a simple blast of a particular flavor.
And it's not necessarily, at least initially, it's not what I think the average person will consider a pleasurable taste. Like it's not a, like if you try chocolate or you try, cheesecake or something.
Strawberry ice cream. There's very few people that you hand them a piece of chocolate or strawberry ice cream and they go, ooh, yuck.
Maybe Noah in his first few months we've been trying to get him to try ice cream. He doesn't want a bar of it.
If he stays off it, he's fine. But
it was interesting in that, oh, wow, okay, so I'm using taste in a different way now to sort of sense these different aspects of something that's complex, and I'm deriving enjoyment from that, but it's not necessarily that I'm sitting there like, oh, that was so satiating. That was so satisfying in terms of I'm no longer hungry or I'm no longer thirsty. It's a different way of experiencing. And I agree. I
think that's the difference between if you're drinking high alcohol liquor for flavour, it's very different from drinking it to get drunk.
Well, you're smelling it, right? That experience too.
If you're going to buy a $100, $200 bottle of whiskey or an expensive gin, and you're going to put, in the case of the gin, you're going to put crap tonic in it, then you might as well just buy the cheap crap, and because nobody can tell the difference.
Well, you're masking the flavours.
But if you're buying really good quality tonic, and you can taste the subtlety in the flavours, and it's the same thing with drinking whiskey. It's the taste experience, not the consumption of it, that is important. It's the same as drinking wine. A part of the experience with whiskey and wine is the swallowing process. So the whole thing about, and I never understood, I'm not a wine connoisseur. I enjoy drinking wine, and there's some particular varieties and brands of wine that I really like. But it always amused me that wine tasting, the theory of wine tasting is that you slosh it around the mouth and then you spit it out. And to me, that misses the stuff right at the back of your tongue and your throat that it's going down. There's a little bit of added extra that you get out of that, and that is particularly true in whiskey. There are some whiskies that you drink where the sensation is purely oral. It's what happens in your mouth, and then you swallow it and you get nothing more. And then there are others where you go, oh, that's all right. Then you swallow it and you go, ooh, that's interesting.
There's been a few that you've given me. I think, to give you names, was it Lagavulin, Lafroig, and Ardbeg too, where you'll get 20 seconds later, it's still there, and the taste and the flavours are evolving. It's not just the same thing. And I guess that's what piques my interest in it now. It's like, ooh, okay, there's some sort of interesting discovery that you can do in this, whereas I don't feel like you would derive it from things like vodka as easily.
No, exactly.
But it's been an interesting
And I think that's
experience.
why wine drinkers, particularly red wine drinkers, because there are differences in white wines, but in red wines that are sort of the spectrum of difference is quite large. And so I think that's why wine drinkers get the same thing, where they can actually get the subtlety and the flavour and so on.
You should probably quickly mention the difference between the way in which whiskey and wine is aged too, because that's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's whiskey. The age of a whiskey is the amount of time it spends in the barrel. It can sit in the bottle for 100 years after that, and theoretically it won't change.
Because in the barrel it's pulling the taste out.
Because in the barrel, once it's out and sitting in glass, then it's done. Unless there's a leakage somehow in the bottle, and that you've got things evaporating, which means that you're going to be evaporating alcohol away, and it'll reduce its alcohol content because the alcohol is it's more volatile than the water, so it's going to evaporate differentially.
And the ratio of alcohol to the other liquids in there will affect the flavour that you get when you're drinking it.
Yeah. So, but ultimately, a whiskey should be the same when it 5 minutes after it's bottled or 5 years after it's bottled.
If bottled correctly.
Yeah. Whereas the wine, because the wine will still have sugars in it and it will still have some other components in it that will theoretically continue to ferment, then the wine will change its flavour over a period of time, which is why wine experts will tell you when you taste a wine and you put it away, some of them will say, oh, look, this one will be better in 5 years, or drink this one tomorrow because it's only going to get worse. And typically white wine goes off quicker than red wine, off in the sense of it gets more vinegary, so that fermentation process changes. So it goes to this acetic acid rather than alcohol, and that's a breakdown product of alcohol. Whereas there's nothing in the whiskey left to continue that alcohol breakdown.
Well, I think you'll notice that with wines too. When I was working in the restaurant, we would have a limit of a few days that you could use a bottle to give glasses.
Oh, once it's opened.
Yeah.
A white wine will last a few hours.
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't, unless it's refrigerated.
Yeah.
And even refrigeration, it probably won't last more than a few days.
Yeah.
A red wine will last a little bit longer, but not much.
I remember having a few of those though. They'd be like, oh, have a knockoff drink, have some wine. And it's like, why do you want to give me the wine? Oh, because the days, the time period's almost up that we need to get rid of it, and you try and you'd be like, yep, we're past it.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, awesome. Well, good to have a little recap of all of that. And
so you know what Pete's been up to for the last month now, don't you?
I think I've been ranting about it. You probably see it in the background.
Yes.
But it is interesting. I don't know. I'm diving deeper in. I think I come at the whiskey thing maybe just as at hobbies. I mean, you know better than it, probably me, of how obsessive and deep I go into these things. But it seems like at the moment I'm at that stage where I'm just so interested in trying everything to really get an idea of what I really like. But you are much more, here's what I like, and I don't drink because I'm searching for new things or new experiences.
I'm drinking because I like it. But I'll try, if somebody says to me, oh, you really like that one, then why don't you try this one?
You should.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Yes. Why don't you? Why don't you? Is the polite you should. If I were you, that's
I would.
Yeah, that's the opening line. If I were you, I would is just a way of saying you should. But no, so I'm much more in the line of there's a handful of whiskies that I really like.
Yeah,
I know that I'm going to spend between sort of, $80, $90 up to $150 on a bottle.
A day?
No, on a bottle that will, and I'll have 3 or 4 bottles will last me a year.
Yep.
Because I don't drink it that often. And so I look at it and go, well, why would I buy something that I'm not sure of for that amount of money? Mm-hmm. I'm happy to taste somebody else's and then go, oh, yeah, I might add that to my list. Or if somebody says, oh, you really like the Ardbeg whatever, try this one because it's similar, but it's a little bit different.
Well, and you've got a history with those brands that you already like anyway, so you're not just going to be, oh my God, it's lemonade.
Yeah, exactly. It's rat poison. Yeah.
Anyway, thanks, Dad. Let's move on to the next topic. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Me and Noah, he's here as well, smacking the microphone with his spoon. That was another episode of the Goss. Don't forget, guys, if you want to get access to all of the Goss episodes, the transcripts, the MP3s, the videos, the entire episodes from 1 to, I think we're up to like 40 something now. Yeah, that's it, mate. Just go to aussieenglish.com.au and you can sign up for those. Anyway, I'm Pete, your host. This has been another Aussie English episode. It's a pleasure, and I'll see you soon.